How would you like to touch and examine the actual pages that Ian Fleming typed when writing his James Bond novels and see where he made handwritten changes that altered the direction of some of the stories? Well, we did, and here's our story. Hi, this is Dan Silvestri.
And Tom Pizzato.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com, the worldwide community of spy movie fans, spy movie podcasts, videos, discussions, and more. Come join us as we're cracking the code of spy movies. And now we'll continue with part 2 and the last part of our Ian Fleming manuscript trip to the Lilly Library at Indiana University. Since we're starting with Dr. No in our final part here, it reminds us that we've been to Dunn's River Falls in Jamaica, which is, of course, a feature in the Dr. No movie. The falls are beautiful, and you can climb the falls from seashore to the top. I think it's about 180 feet. Of course, with a guide and about a million other people. I mean, it's a tourist attraction for sure at this time, but it's still a beautiful place. If you're on a Caribbean cruise, there's a good chance it will stop there in Ocho Rios, and Dunn's River Falls will most certainly be an excursion you can select. Do it. It's fun. We have an entire podcast on the movie Dr. No, so look for that. And now on to Dr. No, published in 1958. We're looking at that manuscript. Honey Rider, of course, is...
Oh, Honey Rider.
In the movie, is the first Bond girl, but here, this is published in 1958, obviously not his first manuscript. Honey Rider in the manuscript is not wearing a bikini, but just...
No, she does not.
Yeah, just a wide leather belt and the hunting knife in a sheath. Anyone could read this in the published book, of course, but looking at the manuscript and how Ian Fleming describes her is quite nice. First, he types that she emerges naked, but then in a handwritten note, in ink, he writes, she was not quite naked. She was wearing a broad leather belt round her waist, with a hunting knife in a leather sheath at her right hip. Yikes. Fleming used a lot of detailed descriptions to make things spicy and hot. The last line in his handwritten correction is, the belt made her nakedness extraordinarily erotic. How cool is that?
That's a great line.
How cool is that? Of course, in the movie, she was wearing a bikini and the knife was actually on her left hip. But probably couldn't get away with her walking out of the water with just the belt and knife.
Yeah, probably not back then.
Yeah.
All right, so now I wanted to kind of go again back to something I talked briefly about in Diamonds Are Forever. Our discussion there is the way that Fleming wrote about race.
Yes.
And he didn't always do it in a flattering way.
No.
And so they tended to get changed.
And in Dr. No, there's a biggie here.
Yeah. So in Dr. No, I mean this is a touchy.
In the manuscript.
This is a touchy subject. So, but I'm going to talk about it anyways. So in the manuscript, it describes the Queen's Club, and then in quote, which for 50 years has boasted no Jews, no Negroes, no dogs. Now this was changed or unquote. So then this was changed to quote, which for 50 years has boasted the power and frequency of its blackballs. So they softened it a little bit, I guess, unquote. So they softened it a little bit and took out the specific Jews and Negroes and just said the power and frequency of its blackballs.
Yeah, they just kind of suggesting that, hey, they're very selective as to who they let in the club. But wow, I'm glad he scratched that out and they softened it a little bit. But
well, and in the movie. Yeah. What do? They just have a sign out front that the three blind men walk by that says private members only, yes. But it doesn't even mention the race.
No.
And the only non-white people at the club appear to work there. Now, given that we're in Jamaica and many of the locals are going to be black, it would make sense that people working at the club would be black.
Sure.
So I don't think that really was a racial statement. Now, there's a new book that came out in June of 2019 by the author Dave Holcomb, which was called His World Never Dies, The Evolution of James Bond. And he discusses in one of the chapters the book itself talks about how the movie series has evolved in its portrayal of masculinity, femininity, race, and humor over the course of its history. And he has a chapter in there called We Had Some Trouble at the Airport. And he tackles the issue of race of Bond in the movies, not in the books, but in the movies in a very direct way. And remember, in the movies, it's a little more subtle. What's there in terms of the racial overtones. It's a good read, and it lays it out fairly plainly. And again, it does focus on the films itself.
It's a good book. It's interesting. He takes a different twist on things, but he does talk a lot about this. You can order the book on Amazon.com. That's where we bought it.
Yeah.
Then we talked to Dave after. And we told him, hey, we like your book. But here's a little secret. If you're interested in this book, His World Never Dies: The Evolution of James Bond, email Dave at holcombmdavid@gmail.com. HOLCOMBM David@gmail.com, and tell him that we sent you. Spy Movie Navigator sent you, and when he sends you the book, it'll be autographed. So that's kind of cool.
That's a nice little touch.
Yeah, he told us that, hey, if you're going to talk about my book ever, tell him that, and you can get an autographed copy, which is neat. So
it is.
There you go.
And again, he hits this topic, and I actually like the way he describes it, because he's talking about the different races and how they get integrated at the film level.
Yeah, it's a good book. We enjoyed the read.
All right, to wrap up Dr. No, we're going to look at how Ian Fleming wrapped it up, and he actually changes the last line of the book. And I actually love reading that, because he did it a couple points, and we would talk about it going through this podcast. But the last line was handwritten by Fleming to say, "Do what I tell you." And in the final version of the book, they actually changed it to "Do as you're told."
Yeah.
Again, why does he make that change?
It's not. Yeah, it's the situation is, he's there at the end of the book, and she Honey Rider, is in control here.
Right.
She's got this sleeping bag or something she just bought, right? And so it's a little different than the movie.
Yep.
So he's writing her as a very strong character. So she's telling him, hey, she's undressed. She tells him she took his shirt off already, and she's telling him, take the rest off. And I got this sleeping bag. By the way, it's for two. It's a double bag. So take those off and get in here. You owe me slave time or something like that, she says.
Yep.
And then she says what you just said, the line.
Which is, do as you're told, is what's in the final version of the book. And in Fleming actually hand wrote before that, do what I tell you.
Yeah. And then Bond says, but, and then she says,
do as you're told.
Do as you're told. I mean, who's in control there?
Absolutely.
Not that Bond's going to resist, but yeah, boom.
But I love when it's the last line that changes, because when you're an author and you're writing something and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I end this thing?
Yeah, that's got to be the most difficult thing, is when is this over?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, okay, do as you're told, and we're done.
It's great. And you see it right there in the manuscript. It's cool.
Now let's move up to 1959 and talk about the book, The Richest Man in the World.
Yeah, that's a great... What?
Wait a minute. What?
Wait.
The Richest Man in the World, of course.
Who's that?
It's Goldfinger.
Ah.
But the book was originally going to be titled The Richest Man in the World.
In the manuscript, Goldfinger is typed out with X's. And then crossed out, and above is handwritten, The Richest Man in the World. And then it's scribbled out with pen. And beneath that is written in pen, Goldfinger.
I love that. It's like, first it was Goldfinger, then it was The Richest Man in the World.
We could have been doing, dun, dun, dun. Wait, The Richest Man in the World. Oh, yeah.
It doesn't quite have the zing as Goldfinger, does it?
No. So, again, fascinating to know what Ian Fleming was thinking here when he was saying The Richest Man in the World. But Goldfinger is a little more impactful, right? So we could have been referring to the seventh novel as The Richest Man in the World. There's another edit.
Yeah, okay, there's another edit. We've talked about name changes, and so there's one here in the book. Jill Masterton was originally called Tilly Masterton.
Now, notice Tom saying Masterton.
Right, so in the book, it was Masterton.
In the manuscript, it's Masterton.
And in the movie, it's Masterson.
Right.
Now, Tilly was scratched out and renamed Jill. So, another name change that had to go through, and you had to change it in multiple places.
Yeah, and her sister became Tilly.
And the sister became Tilly.
Yeah. So that's cool. His car in the book, Goldfinger, is an Aston Martin DB3. But in the manuscript here, it was a DB7 until it was crossed out and became a DB3. So
it's still what version of the car made so much difference to him. And then, when we get to the movie, we of course know it's a DB5.
The DB5 in the movie, yeah. But here you got Aston Martin here. And
the most famous car in the world.
I love the scratch outs and then how they become everything we know.
It's
from that little scratch out.
Like that Miss Moneypenny thing. Yeah. It's cool.
Very cool. All right, next we're going to look at For Your Eyes Only. It was published in 1960. This is a collection of short stories, and it's in this. We're going to recognize some of the titles. From a View to a Kill is in this short story collection. Nothing to do with the movie View to a Kill in the movie. So it's kind of nice. There's one line in there which is very close to the line in GoldenEye when Natalia Simonova says to Bond, "You are just like boys with toys." There's a line in there that says, "You're just like a lot of children playing at Red Indian." So there's no question they got a lot. The Ian production people who are doing the movies got a lot from these short stories, and they move pieces around a lot, which they did brilliantly, I thought.
Right, absolutely.
They're not going to make a whole movie generally out of the little stuff that's in the short stories. Some of these things were like 10 pages or something.
Right.
So anyway, From a View to a Kill is part of this collection. Death Leaves an Echo, which we read a little bit of it there. I just love the title. I think they should make a movie called Death Leaves an Echo.
That would be a good title for a future Bond.
Yeah. Quantum of Solace is in this short story collection too. And it's really not a Bond story, but he's in it. It's more of a story within a story that someone narrates to Bond, really. But I just thought the last line in it was about Bond was, for some reason, his life suddenly seemed hollow and lonely. There's still elements with Fleming writing about Bond that he's not always a superhero guy. He's a human being, and he has human feelings and stuff like that. So that was kind of cool. And Rosico is also part of this. Now, from Rosico, of course, we know they made a movie, Quantum of Solace. Again, it has nothing to do with this little short story. Rosico, though, is where we get the characters Columbo and Kristatos in For Your Eyes Only. They come from this little short story, Rosico. And that's kind of cool when you're looking at this kind of stuff. And Fleming had been to these islands, the Seychelles, in 1958, so he incorporated a lot of what he knew from that little trip into this. But it's neat. And then the last part of this was the Hildenbrand Rarity.
Well, actually, before you move to that, on Quantum of Solace, you mentioned the last line. He actually made a change to that, right, in the manuscript there. So it used to say, the last line about Bond says, for some reason his life suddenly seemed hollow and lonely. But the word suddenly was handwritten and replaced the word now, and the word hollow was typed and replaced with the word empty. So he originally had, for some reason, his life now seemed empty and lonely. And he beefs that up, makes it more descriptive with, for some reason, his life suddenly seemed hollow instead of empty.
Yeah. Right. And hollow does have a more lonely kind of feel to it, like a hollow anything.
And suddenly like instead of now, there. It adds more action to it. And it's that kind of stuff that you see in this that just intrigues me, because it's like, wow, that's a great edit.
So in the last short story in this collection, For Your Eyes Only, is the Hildenbrand Rarity. Now, in real life, the Hildenbrand Rarity is a fish. It's a rare fish, and it was caught by Professor Hildenbrand of Johannesburg University. He caught it in a net off Chagrin Island in the Seychelles. And I think it was April 1925. So it's a unique member of the squirrelfish family. So it's a real thing. But in the short story here, this is where Milton Crest is in the stories. I mean, Ian Productions lifted the character Crest out of this story and put it into License to Kill very, very seamlessly. I thought it was a great.
Yeah, it is really cool how they can do that.
Yeah, and it's really kind of neat because in real life, again, Milton was a code name of a Greek sea captain who ferried British soldiers and agents through German patrols. And Crest was a tonic and ginger beer that Fleming drank when he was in the Seychelles. So, I mean, that's where Fleming got this stuff. But it's kind of neat. Anyway, that's the last piece of this little short story part. And I thought that was pretty neat that the Hillenbrand Rarity really is a fish, too.
That is cool.
And Milton Crest came right out of here.
So now we move to 1962 with The Spy Who Loved Me. Now this actually is a book that was written, and it's credited as Ian Fleming with Vivienne Michel. It was actually written from Vivian's perspective. She's telling the story. And so she's the character name of this person who tells a story. And on page 9, she says, "My name is Vivienne Michel. And at the time and the name Vivian is actually spelled Vivian and then crossed out and spelled Vivienne, giving it more of a French feel."
Vivienne.
Yeah, Vivienne. So it's kind of interesting that even something like the person's name, how that change can make a difference. Now, in this manuscript and in some of the manuscripts that we looked at, it looks like we got later versions of the manuscripts for some of these because there weren't very many edits. Right, most of the edits in this thing were minor grammar, some spelling, wordsmithing, and stuff, but nothing really major. This is another one where the last line changes. It originally said, "I knew exactly who he was, and he was, this was a man." The ellipses there were some ellipses there, and there were words underneath that we can't really read. So it says, "I knew exactly who he was, and he was," and then we couldn't read it, and then it says, "This was a man." Now it says, "I knew exactly who he was and what he was and everything. Every smallest detail would be written on my heart forever."
Yeah, kind of cool.
Kind of cool. Changes the ending a bit there. And you get to see this kind of stuff when you're looking at something like these manuscripts.
Yeah, and again, this has nothing to do with the movie. Ian Fleming did not want this manuscript, this book, to be turned into a movie. He let them use the title, but he didn't like the flow of the story or whatever to be into a movie. He just, I don't know, for some reason he didn't want that to happen.
Well, it was a totally different kind of thing because it was a story being told. Vivienne was telling the story.
Right.
So
it was a third person.
Yeah,
kind of thing,
yeah. So it was a little bit different. Yeah. I mean, how do you make that into one of what we think of as the Bond movies?
Yeah. So again, this little thing has nothing to do with the Spy Who Loved Me movie, which is one of my favorite Bond movies. Anyway, it's cool.
You gotta love it.
All right, well, moving on to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, published in 1963, and one of my favorite movies.
That movie is just so good.
Yeah.
The story is just so good.
The story is a great story. And everyone did a great job in there. George Lazenby and Diana Rigg and everyone. Great stuff. But here, in the manuscript, we're seeing some changes that we have all become now familiar with in the movies and in the book. Initially, Fleming scratches out the name M. Stamboni and hand writes in pen, Draco.
Yeah!
Another name change that to us Bond fans, Draco is so well known, not Stamboni.
Yeah, I actually think Draco's a much better last name.
Yeah,
for that character.
It is. It was perfect, actually. And Fleming described his face as a delightful face, so lit with humor and mischief and magnetism. And who they selected for this, Gabriel Ferzetti, was perfectly cast for this in the movie as Marc-Ange Draco. One of my favorites.
Yeah, what a great character.
And then a little bit later in the manuscript, Draco is talking about his marriage, and the result of his marriage is his daughter, Teresina. But wait, Fleming scratches out Teresina, and he pens in Teresa. And then a little further, the next page actually, we discover that Tracy's first husband, an Italian that Draco did not like, deserted her. But Fleming scratches out Draco, which was going to be her husband's name, and puts in instead Count Giulio Vincenzo. So, Originally,
Wow, wait a minute. Wait. You're going to have to back up on that.
I know.
Right? We've got these names being used all over the place.
Originally in the manuscript, Tracy's husband was going to be called Draco, but now he changed Stamboni to Draco to be her father in the few pages before, and so now he can't call her husband Draco anymore. So he scratches out Draco there, and he makes her husband in the manuscript Giulio Vincenzo.
Boy, I hope all of you could follow that one.
Yeah.
Woo!
So again, Fleming reversed the surnames of her Italian husband and her father, as he did earlier in a few pages, like we said before. So when Bond meets Draco for the first time, he does indeed throw the knife at a calendar in the manuscript, saying September the 16th, and he sticks it in the calendar. Draco says actually it's the 15th, but quite respectable. So it's very close to what they did in the movie, and that's right here. Of course, they mentioned Blofeld in here. Piz Gloria is mentioned in here.
Oh, I love Piz Gloria.
The 10 gorgeous girls in Piz Gloria. All of that's there. Even the Walter PPK is mentioned. And a little bit later in the middle of this manuscript about Fleming scratches out Harper's for what Bond is drinking and writes in Jack Daniels bourbon. Bond pours himself a drink on the rocks and added water. Okay. Harper's is out. Jack Daniels is in. In the manuscript, he's married at the British Council on New Year's Day at 10:30 a.m. The head of Station M was the best man. After the ceremony at the council's home, Bond walks down the steps to the waiting Lancia with white ribbons tied from the corners and everything else, the windshield, just like we saw in the movie with the Aston convertible. It's not in Portugal, however. This in the manuscript.
Right, in the movie it was in Portugal.
And they're driving here on the Autobahn near Strasbourg and Kufstein. And Tracy, in the written manuscript, is driving, and Bond asks her to pull over. So not like the movie where Bond is driving and so on. But it's kind of cool. And the manuscript, he said, I got to do two things. One, he took her into his arms and he kissed her. In pen, Fleming writes above the typewritten lines, that's the first thing. And I just want to say that. Back to the typewritten stuff. I'll look after you, Tracy. Will you mind being looked after? And Tracy replies to him with a smile and concludes, let's just look after each other. Again, here Fleming's writing these characters as strong characters.
Oh, what? Yeah, right? I mean, and what a great line for Tracy, because she's not that damsel in distress type of a character.
Not at all.
She's in just kind of like Honey Rider at the end, right? She's got some control here, and she says, no, you're not just going to take care of me. Let's look after each other. Yeah. I love that.
It's perfect. And it's perfect for, hey, they just got married. They're partners now. They're one. So in the manuscript here, Bond wants to get out of the car and take the ribbons and stuff off. He said, I can't stand looking like a coronation. Do you mind? So this part is very close to the movie. They took the roof down, they lowered the top, and Tracy says, yeah, let's. We can only see half the world with it up. And he hand wrote that. Yeah. So that's kind of cool, where it's like, okay, that gives you an excuse for taking it down. And as they drive, Bond notices this speck of a red car miles behind them, and Tracy notices it coming up fast. And so, you want me to lose them? Nah, Bond says, let him go. We've got all the time in the world. Of course.
You've got all
the time in the world.
In the world.
Yeah, Tom and I promised not to sing anymore.
Oh, sorry.
And Bond waves them past. And he hears a shattering roar and the windshield disappeared. So a little different in the manuscript here, where they actually kind of crash and so on, and he passes out. It's different than the book, and than the movie. In the book, it implies it was really Blofeld,
right,
who shot him,
right,
and not
Blunt.
But in the movie, of course, he's driving with the neck brace. Yeah. Telly Savalas is Blofeld. So it's a little bit different here, but then he does get the policeman does show up and everything, just like the movie again, and it's pretty cool. So the account, and he tells
it's just a touching way to end it.
And he tells the policeman, "We've got all the time in the world," and this is the iconic line, of course, from the movie, and the Louis Armstrong song of the same title is haunting when heard from that point forward. Very neat to see the original manuscript of one of our all-time favorite Bond movies.
Very, very cool. All right, so we'll look at the 1964 film You Only Live Twice. Now, this is another one of those manuscripts where there weren't very many corrections. There are numerous pages, however, with different typefaces and paper sizes. So I'm presuming that this means that pages were replaced. So we can't see the original. We're just seeing these new typewritten pages. So it's a little harder to do what we've been talking about with some of these changes. Some minor things like the credit for the poem at the beginning was changed from Japanese itinerant poet to just Japanese poet. R.M. Hughes was changed to Richard Hughes. In Chapter 7, he lists these poison categories. It's like, here's the poison and a description of it. And he's apparently replacing what was originally on pages 50 and 51, which aren't in the manuscript. So in the actual manuscript that you're looking at, those pages are missing. So it looks like he just replaced it with these list of the poisons that he's got. And that's really about it in terms of the changes in this manuscript.
So 11 manuscripts later, we feel like we know Bond and Ian Fleming much better. We've gotten a peek into Fleming's mind as he developed these stories. This was a fabulous outing.
Yeah, it was a good time.
To see the original manuscripts of Ian Fleming's James Bond novels. What a unique experience and opportunity. We really loved seeing the handwritten entries Fleming made. That was really cool. We would love to go back and study the manuscripts even more. Just as a reminder, you need to make a reservation to use the reading room, so don't just show up. And
it's under reconstruction now until probably 2020.
2021 or 2.
Yeah.
Probably early spring of 22.
Yeah, I would think so, because they told me it was about 2 years. Now, one final thought on this. Indiana University is a very large university in the U.S., if you're not familiar with it. The campus is still great. The Lilly Library was absolutely wonderful. And Mother Bear's Pizza, it's still fantastic.
It was good.
It's one of those where you're sitting there going like, boy, I'm going to try this after 30 years. Is it going to still be as good? And it really was.
Yeah, it was good. I have to admit, I'm Italian. I love pizza. This wraps up our trip to the Lilly Library at Indiana University and our terrific tour of the Bond manuscripts. Subscribe to our podcast on spy movies as we look at connections between these films and other spy movie films and their connections to the real world as we continue cracking the code of spy movies. This podcast was focused on Bond and the Ian Fleming manuscripts. We have podcasts focused on Mission Impossible, connections between Bond and Sherlock Holmes, classic spy movies like The 39 Steps, filming location trips we've taken, and a whole lot more. We're constantly looking for these connections as we are constantly cracking the code of spy movies.
Thanks for listening. This is Tom Pizzato
and Dan Silvestri
from SpyMovieNavigator.com, the worldwide community of spy movie fans. Spy movie podcasts, videos, discussions, and more. If you like our podcast, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and in Google Play. That helps us a lot. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and on Instagram too. And when you have feedback, an idea for a podcast, or just something you want to say, click the red button on our website that says send us a voicemail, and we may include it in our show.